On to this now. In the last few days, we have heard complaints raised by various political parties in the Western Cape about alleged voter registration fraud in the by-elections there. One example is that of 188 voters who are registered to vote using one residential address. Now, the Good Party has called on the IEC to investigate. So, how worried should we be about such an incident leading up to the national elections in 2024? Brett Herron is the Secretary General of the Good Party, joining me now for a quick conversation. Brett, good morning to you. You are one of the complainants in this matter of 188 voters registered in one residential area. What actually happened here?
Good morning. Look, I mean, the 188 registered voters at one street address, which is a small house in Puckelsdorp in George, is the tip of the iceberg. So we've registered an objection to the by-elections, both before the by-elections took place and afterwards. And I think the 188 people registered to one street address must be seen in a much bigger context, which starts with an unusually high number of new registrations of voters for by-elections using the online voter registration system, followed by an unusually high number of approved special votes. So those are people who vote before the election, the day before the election. Almost 2,700 people were registered for special votes in 3 by-elections, which is an extremely high number. And then the evidence from Democratic Alliance canvassers who gave us affidavits that they were sent into areas like Thembalethu, which were not part of the by-elections, to recruit voters to be re-registered in one of the wards where the by-elections were taking place. So the IEC's primary duty is to ensure free and fair elections, and that their systems are not able to detect these unusually high numbers, the unusually high number of registered voters to one address, the high number of re-registrations or new registrations, the high number of special votes, and the movement of people from surrounding wards suddenly into new wards, or sharing the same address is just a big worry for us as we go into 2024.
You mentioned the Democratic Alliance, Brett Herron. Are you suggesting that it was the Democratic Alliance that benefited through this process that you have just explained? And if that is indeed what you are inferring, are you accusing them then of electoral fraud?
Yes, I'm accusing them of electoral fraud. And even, we brought an application to the Electoral Court to try and stop the by-elections once we found this evidence. But the application was dismissed, and we're waiting for the reasons for that. But even on the DA's own version, in reply to our court papers, they acknowledged that they registered people from outside of the ward in Ward 20, which is one of the wards that we were contesting. But they blame the canvassers for misleading them. The canvassers have given us a subsequent affidavit which dispels that misleading part and points out that the people that they recruited in Thembalethu were registered at the canvasser's own home address in the wards. So yes, I am accusing the Democratic Alliance of electoral fraud.
We're going to have to get their side of the story. The IEC, you've already explained that this is their duty, their systems should be able to detect stuff like this. How worried are you leading up to 2024?
I am worried, first of all, by the attitude that the IEC took, that because we didn't object to these voters according to the by-election timetable, which would have required us to object to these voters being registered in the ward by the 20th of June or the 22nd of June, that we were out of time in raising this fraudulent voter re-registration. Now that's an absurd argument, and it's an argument based on convenience to the IEC in managing by-elections, rather than the spirit and the requirements of the law that they conduct free and fair elections. We became aware of the fraud on the 14th of July, 3 or 4 days before the elections were about to start. To argue or to suggest that we should have raised this information a month earlier doesn't make sense. The IEC's attitude in dealing with the allegations and the evidence is deeply worrying, because their duty is to ensure free and fair elections, and free and fair elections did not take place last week in George.
There is a statement which appears to have been issued by the Democratic Alliance, Brett, and I just want to quickly touch on it, where the DA says that the same number was registered in the same address when Good, this is your party now, when Good won the ward before. Are you aware of this?
Well, the 188 people registered to one address, I mean, that was what was on the voters' roll in 2021 when Good did win the ward. But that doesn't explain why the IEC allowed it, didn't detect it. We certainly didn't register those people at that address. Someone must have, in an attempt to undermine the system.
But you benefited at the time. You benefited at the time. Why didn't you raise the issue then?
We only detected it on Monday, the 17th of July, when we put the voters' roll into street order. You must remember the voters' roll comes in alphabetical order by surname. But when you convert it into street order, which is what we did, you can start to see patterns that we didn't pick up before. Now, you can't say that we benefited. We don't know who those 188 people voted for. The fact of the matter is 188 people are registered to one address. We only detected it on the 17th of July, and it still makes the voters' roll an unreliable document, and it is the voters' roll that must determine whether the elections are free and fair, because people from outside of the ward who are registered in the ward shouldn't be electing the ward councillor.
And so I think what you are pointing to here is the IEC's processes in the lead up to such a crucial election in 2024. Have you had an engagement with them about this? And perhaps what do you think is going to be done in order for stuff like this to be avoided?
So, I mean, I am worried about the IEC's processes, and I'm particularly worried about the abuse of the online voter registration system, which was introduced to allow voters to re-register themselves or to register themselves as voters. But what has happened is that in the voters from outside the ward in the ward. So the fact that the online voter registration system is unreliable or not foolproof is deeply worrying. We raised it with the IEC in our objection and our request to the IEC to investigate those voters who shouldn't be in the wards that we were contesting, and to postpone the by-elections to conduct that investigation, and they declined to do so. We've now lodged the same objection post the by-elections in terms of the legislation, and if the IEC still refuses to investigate those voters, then we'll have to go back to the electoral court. We have also raised it in a meeting that the IEC called in George on the day of the by-elections, and they suggested that we report it to the police. So there is a concern from my side around their lack of interest in the abuse of their own systems.
All right. Brett Herron, let me thank you very much for your time. We're going to have to talk to the Democratic Alliance, who have just been accused of electoral fraud, but also importantly, the IEC. We're going to have to get them on air about tightening their processes.